In the dimming light of an early evening, I stood in the kitchen, wiping away tears. A persistent shrill ring from the intercom startled me, snapping me back to reality. On the monitor, Meredith, my mother-in-law, stood rigidly beside Claire, my husband Adrian's sister. My heart sank. They were the last people I wanted to see. I composed myself and hurried to the door, expecting yet another confrontation. But the scene that unfolded left me speechless. The door swung open to reveal Meredith commanding a group of men who looked like movers. "Bring everything in," she ordered sharply. "What? Wait, what's going on?" I stammered, utterly bewildered. Lucas, my 13-year-old son, dashed downstairs, drawn by the commotion. "Mom, what's happening?" he asked, his eyes wide with confusion. Before I could answer, Meredith's voice sliced through the air, cold and unyielding. "We're taking over Adrian's house. You two need to leave." Lucas's face drained of color. "No, you can't do this," he protested, his voice trembling. "Don't you know, Aunt Claire? This house, it's cursed." The room fell eerily silent. Meredith and Harold, my father-in-law, exchanged a look of smug satisfaction while the movers paused, sensing the tension. My name is Eleanor, and at 38 I never imagined life could twist in such a cruel way. Adrian, my husband, was a hard-working, kind man. He never indulged in vices like drinking or gambling and devoted himself to our family. Our weekends were simple, watching movies and enjoying each other's company. Adrian often spoke of his high school days, his voice tinged with nostalgia. He had been the class and student council president, a stark contrast to the dutiful but uninspired life his sister Claire led. She had followed their parents' wishes to the letter, attending a prestigious private high school and working at a company they approved of. Yet, she lacked the ability to think for herself, a trait that led her to quit her job and marry a man chosen by her parents. Meredith and Harold's obsession with appearances had always been a source of contention. They sent Claire to an expensive private school, hoping to match a wealthy family in their neighborhood. This decision plunged them into debt, a burden they still carried. As the movers began filling our living room with boxes and furniture, I felt a wave of panic. This house, the symbol of our hard work and dreams, was being invaded and claimed as if we were mere squatters. Adrian's relationship with his parents had always been strained, especially after he chose a public high school over the private one they preferred. Their pride was wounded, and they never let him forget it. When Adrian and I chose this house, it was our declaration of independence, a step away from the overbearing control of Meredith and Harold. Now, as I watched our home being taken over, a sense of helplessness washed over me. Adrian was not here to defend us. His battle with cancer had left him weakened, and our finances were strained to the breaking point. Lucas, sensing my despair, grabbed my hand. His eyes, so much like his father's, were filled with fear and confusion. "Mom, we can't let them do this. We have to fight back." His words ignited a spark within me. Yes, we had to fight. This was our home, our sanctuary. I wouldn't let Meredith and Harold take it without a struggle. As the movers continued their work, I realized this was more than a simple invasion. It was a declaration of war, and I was ready to fight back. That night, after the movers had left and the house lay eerily silent, I sat in the living room, surrounded by boxes that were not ours. Lucas had retreated to his room, the weight of the day's events too heavy for his young shoulders. Alone with my thoughts, I found myself traveling back in time, unraveling the threads of discord that had led us to this bitter moment. Adrian's upbringing under Meredith and Harold had been a study in silent rebellion. His choice of a public high school had been his first act of defiance against their suffocating control. It was a decision that shifted something fundamental in their relationship. Adrian, once the apple of his parents' eye, became a disappointment, a blemish on their meticulously crafted image. Claire, in stark contrast, had been the obedient child, acquiescing to every demand and expectation. She was molded into a version of success that Meredith and Harold deemed acceptable, her life a series of choices made by others. She had gone to a prestigious school, worked at a high-status job, and even her marriage had been a transaction of their making. Adrian often spoke of his sister with a mixture of pity and frustration. "She's never had to think for herself," he would say. "How will she cope when life throws her a curveball?" Little did we know, the curveball would come hurling towards us all. I was jolted from my reverie by the sound of the front door opening. It was Claire, her face pale and drawn. "Eleanor, I'm sorry about earlier, but you have to understand we need this house," she stammered, avoiding my gaze. "Need it?" I echoed, my voice rising. "This is our home, Claire. You can't just take it because you want it." Claire's eyes flickered with something akin to guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by a familiar stubbornness. "It's not just about wanting. Mom and Dad are in debt because of my education and lifestyle. They see this house as a way out. A way out at our expense," I shot back, the bitterness in my voice unmistakable. Claire's face hardened. "It's not my fault Adrian chose to distance himself from the family. He made his choices. And now we all have to live with them." The audacity of her words struck me like a slap. Adrian had made his choices, yes, but not for selfish reasons. He had chosen a path of integrity and honesty, values that seemed alien to his own family. As Claire left, her footsteps echoing hollowly in the hallway, I realized the depth of the divide between us. Adrian had often lamented the lack of understanding and compassion in his family, but I had never truly grasped the extent of it until now. The next morning I found Lucas in the kitchen, his eyes red from a sleepless night. "Mom, we can't let them win. Dad wouldn't have wanted this." He was right. Adrian had fought for this family with every fiber of his being. It was now up to us to continue that fight. "We won't let them win, Lucas," I said, a newfound determination in my voice. "We'll fight for our home and for your dad's memory." As Lucas and I sat there, planning our next move, I knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. But we were not alone in this battle. Adrian's spirit, his unwavering love and strength, would guide us through the storm. The memory of our visit to Meredith and Harold's house a few days prior haunted me. It had been a last-ditch effort, a plea for help in our darkest hour. The walls of their living room, adorned with ostentatious decor, seemed to close in on us as Adrian and I sat across from them, our hands tightly clasped. "Please, you have to help us," I had begun, my voice trembling. "Adrian's treatment, it's our only hope." Meredith had looked at us, her expression unmoved, while Harold fidgeted uncomfortably in his chair. It was Claire, however, who spoke first, her voice devoid of empathy. "Cancer treatments are expensive, Eleanor, and they're not always successful." Her words, cold and clinical, stung like a physical blow. Adrian, despite his weakening state, sat up straighter, a fire kindling in his eyes. "It's not just about the treatment. It's about having the chance to fight, to spend more time with my family." "You know our financial situation," Harold interjected, his voice a mixture of defensiveness and guilt. "We've just managed to get out of debt. We can't risk falling back into it." The irony of his words was not lost on me. They had lived beyond their means for years, prioritizing appearances over everything else. And now, when their son needed them the most, they hid behind the veil of financial prudence. "I never asked for anything before," Adrian said, his voice low. "All I'm asking is for a chance to live, to be there for my son." Meredith's response was a masterclass in passive aggression. "Adrian, we've always supported your choices, even when they went against our wishes, but we can't jeopardize our retirement for this." Their refusal was a clear message. Their comfort was more important than their son's life. As we stood to leave, defeated and heartbroken, Nathan, Claire's husband, had quietly handed Adrian an envelope. "It's not much, but it's all I can do right now," he had whispered, his eyes filled with genuine sorrow. The memory of that moment, of Nathan's kindness amidst the cold indifference of his own family, filled me with both gratitude and rage. How could people be so devoid of compassion? Back in the present, Lucas and I were jolted from our planning by the sound of the doorbell. I opened it to find Martin, Adrian's childhood friend, standing on the doorstep. His arrival was like a breath of fresh air in the suffocating atmosphere that had enveloped our home. "Eleanor, Lucas," he greeted us, his eyes filled with concern. "I heard about what happened. I'm here to help." His words, simple and sincere, were a lifeline. Martin had always been the one person outside our immediate family who understood Adrian, who shared his values and sense of integrity. As we sat down, Martin listened intently to our story, his expression turning darker with each word. "I can't believe they would do this to you," he said, his voice tinged with anger. "But I have an idea. It's a bit unconventional, but it might just work. In that moment, I saw a glimmer of hope. Martin's presence, his willingness to stand with us, reignited our fighting spirit. We were not alone in this battle, and with his help, we were going to take a stand against the injustice that had been thrust upon us. Martin's plan was as brilliant as it was bold. As we sat in our living room, now cluttered with the in-laws' belongings, he laid out his strategy with a calm assurance that was both comforting and invigorating. "First, we need to tackle the financial angle," Martin began, his eyes fixed on a notepad filled with figures and calculations. "I've been doing well in real estate, and I can buy your house. That will give you the cash you need to pay off the mortgage and cover Adrian's medical expenses." Lucas and I exchanged a look of disbelief. "But Martin, that's a huge amount," I protested, my voice a mix of gratitude and concern. Martin waved off my objections. "Adrian has been more than a friend to me. He's been like a brother. I can't just stand by and watch his family suffer." His generosity was overwhelming, yet it was his next words that truly took us by surprise. "Once I buy the house, I'll rent it back to you at a nominal fee. That way you can stay here and the in-laws can't claim it." The simplicity and elegance of his plan were astonishing. Not only would it secure our financial needs, but it would also keep us in our home and out of Meredith and Harold's reach. "But won't that put you at a disadvantage?" Lucas asked, his young face etched with concern. Martin chuckled, a warm, reassuring sound. "I'm doing just fine. Consider it an investment in justice and friendship." As we discussed the details, the doorbell rang. Standing at the door was Claire, her face a mask of false concern. "Eleanor, I heard about Martin's plan. You can't seriously be considering it," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Why not, Claire? Because it doesn't serve your interests?" I shot back, my patience wearing thin. Claire's eyes narrowed. "You're being unreasonable. This house should be in the family, and by family I mean our family." The hypocrisy of her words was almost laughable. "Your family," I echoed. "Where was this family when Adrian needed help? When he was fighting for his life?" Claire faltered, her facade cracking. "That's different. We have our own needs." "Needs that apparently don't include compassion or decency," Martin interjected, his tone icy. Claire's retreat was hasty and undignified, her high heels clicking angrily against the floor as she left. Turning back to Martin, I felt a surge of gratitude and determination. His plan was more than a financial arrangement. It was a statement, a stand against the cruelty and selfishness of Meredith, Harold, and Claire. "We're in," I said firmly, Lucas nodding in agreement beside me. "Let's do this." Martin smiled, a smile that spoke of deep bonds and unspoken promises. "I'll get the ball rolling. We're going to turn this around, Eleanor, for Adrian, for Lucas, and for justice." As he left, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. We were no longer fighting alone. With Martin's help, we were going to reclaim our lives and our home. The battle lines had been drawn, and we were ready for the fight ahead. The following weeks were a blur of hospital visits and legal preparations. Martin worked tirelessly to finalize the sale of the house, while Lucas and I spent as much time as possible with Adrian in the hospital. His condition was deteriorating rapidly, and we treasured every moment we had with him. One evening, as Lucas and I sat beside Adrian's hospital bed, his breathing shallow and labored, the door opened. In walked Meredith and Harold, their expressions somber yet strangely detached. "Oh, Adrian," Meredith exclaimed in a tone that was more theatrical than heartfelt. "We came as soon as we heard how serious it was." Harold added in a similarly insincere tone, "We've been so worried about you." Adrian, mustering the last of his strength, turned to face them. "Worried?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "You have a strange way of showing it." The air in the room grew tense, the pretense of a happy family reunion shattering into pieces. "We did what we thought was best," Harold defended weakly. "Best for whom?" I couldn't help but interject, my voice thick with emotion. "Certainly not for Adrian." Meredith's eyes flashed with irritation. "Eleanor, now is not the time for your accusations. We're here to support our son." "Support?" Lucas suddenly burst out, his young face contorted in anger and grief. "You never supported Dad. You turned your backs on him when he needed you most." The truth of Lucas's words seemed to hit Meredith and Harold like a physical blow. They exchanged a look, their facade crumbling under the weight of their sons' and grandsons' accusations. Adrian reached out, his hand trembling, and clasped mine. "I'm sorry, Eleanor, Lucas," he whispered. "I wish things could have been different." Tears streamed down my face as I held his hand tightly, trying to convey a lifetime of love and gratitude in that one touch. Meredith and Harold left soon after, their exit as hollow and empty as their expressions of concern had been. They had come to say goodbye, but their presence only served to highlight the chasm that had grown between them and their son over the years. Adrian's condition worsened over the next few days, and it became clear that he wouldn't be coming home. Martin, true to his word, completed the sale of the house, ensuring our financial security and giving us one less thing to worry about. When the end finally came, it was peaceful. Adrian passed away surrounded by those who truly loved him, Lucas, me, and a few close friends. His parents were notably absent, having chosen to stay away after their last uncomfortable visit. The funeral was a somber affair, attended by family, friends, and colleagues. Meredith and Harold were there, their expressions solemn, but their presence felt more like a formality than a genuine expression of grief. As I stood by Adrian's graveside, a mix of sorrow and anger simmering within me, I made a silent vow. I would not let his parents and sister tarnish his memory. I would fight for justice, for Adrian, and for our son. The day after the funeral, as Lucas and I were sifting through Adrian's belongings, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Meredith, Harold, and Claire standing there, their faces a mix of false sympathy and barely concealed greed. "We're here to discuss the house," Meredith announced, her voice tinged with a note of entitlement. Lucas and I exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between us. This was the moment we had been preparing for. "You've discussed enough," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "The house is no longer a topic of discussion. It's ours." Harold scoffed. "Eleanor, be reasonable. This house should stay in the family. We're willing to overlook past disagreements for the sake of unity." "Unity?" Lucas interjected, his young voice firm. "There was never any unity, only your selfishness." Claire stepped forward, attempting a softer approach. "Eleanor, we understand you're going through a tough time, but think about the future. Surely, Adrian would have wanted his family to stick together." I couldn't help but laugh, a sound more bitter than amused. Adrian wanted a family that supported and loved each other, not one that turned their backs on him in his time of need. Their expressions shifted from feigned concern to frustration. It was clear they had expected us to be broken, easy to manipulate. But we stood united, an unbreakable front. Before they could respond, the doorbell rang again. It was Martin, his arrival perfectly timed. "Good afternoon," he greeted everyone with a nod. "I think it's time we cleared up a few things." Meredith bristled at his presence. "And what would you know about our family matters?" Martin's reply was calm but laced with an underlying strength. "More than you think. You see, I now own this house." The revelation hit them like a physical blow, their faces a picture of shock and disbelief. "You what?" Harold managed to sputter. "I bought the house from Adrian and Eleanor to help them out, and I've rented it back to them for a nominal fee. Legally, they are my tenants, and you have no claim here," Martin explained, his tone leaving no room for argument. The color drained from their faces, the reality of the situation sinking in. Their plan to take over the house had crumbled to dust. Meredith's composure finally cracked, her voice rising in anger. "You can't do this to us. This is our son's house." "No, Meredith, it was your son's house," I corrected her, "and he chose to ensure it remained a home for his family, me and Lucas." The in-laws stood there, defeated and deflated. Their scheme had been thwarted, their true colors exposed for all to see. Martin stepped forward, his presence commanding. "I suggest you leave now. You're not welcome here anymore." Without another word, they turned and left, their departure marking the end of their hold over us. As the door closed behind them, Lucas hugged me tightly. "We did it, Mom. Dad would be proud." I hugged him back, tears of relief and triumph in my eyes. Yes, we did. And yes, he would. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The house, once a battleground of familial strife, now resonated with a sense of peace and resolution. However, our triumph was not without its final test. One evening, as Lucas and I were reminiscing about Adrian, the doorbell rang. Standing outside were Meredith, Harold, and a tearful Claire, their expressions a blend of fear and desperation. "Eleanor," "We need to talk," Meredith began, her voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. "What is it this time?" I asked, wary of their intentions. "It's the house. It's haunted," Claire blurted out, her eyes wide with genuine fear. Lucas and I exchanged a glance, trying to suppress our disbelief. "Haunted?" I echoed. "Yes," Harold chimed in, his usual composure shaken. "Strange noises, objects moving on their own. We've been experiencing it ever since we moved in." Their story unfolded, a tale of eerie occurrences and unexplained events that had driven them to the brink of hysteria. It was clear that their guilt and fear had manifested in their minds, turning the house into a source of terror. Martin, who had arrived shortly after, listened to their tale with a barely concealed smirk. "Well, that's quite a story, but as the owner of the house, I haven't noticed anything unusual." "It's true," Claire insisted, her voice trembling. "Please, you have to believe us." The sight of them, so broken and humbled, stirred a complex mix of emotions within me. Here were the people who had caused us so much pain, now reduced to pleading for our help. "I think it's time you all face the truth," I said, my voice steady. "This house isn't haunted by ghosts, but by your own actions. You turned against your own family, and now you're haunted by the consequences of those choices." Their faces fell, the truth of my words hitting them with full force. "Perhaps it's time you find another place to live," Martin suggested, his tone final. As they left, their shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt a sense of closure. The house was finally free of their toxic presence, and we could start to heal and rebuild. In the months that followed, Lucas and I grew closer, our bond strengthened by the trials we had endured. Martin became a regular visitor, his presence a constant reminder of the loyalty and kindness that still existed in the world. The house, once a symbol of conflict, now echoed with laughter and love. Adrian's memory lived on in every room, a guiding light in our journey forward. Looking back, I realized that our fight was not just for the house, but for our dignity and for the right to live on our terms. In the end, we had not only preserved our home, but also reclaimed our lives. And as for Meredith, Harold, and Claire, they learned a hard lesson about the consequences of greed and betrayal. Karma, it seemed, had echoed their actions back to them in the most fitting way.